All right, so now let me now talk about how do you really handle the exception, right? So the idea is, let me just go back to the call stack very quickly. When you are the caller of some method that might throw an exception object when the error occurs, in that case, you actually got two choices, either to catch or to specify the exception. In this particular case, since there's no exception handler, so it must be the specify option rather than the catch option. On the other hand, and the exception will be propagated, as we said, to the next caller. And for this caller, they are facing the same choice again. Basically, as long as the exception being propagated has not been handled, the caller facing it must make a choice between the two, either to catch the exception, meaning that to handle it, or it must specify it, meaning that you're going to propagate the exception further to your caller. Okay, so but in this method over here, it is opted for a different choice, which is to handle the exception. Okay, but we're going to see exactly what happened. But let me just annotate furthermore. What's going to happen is for this particular caller over here, it was the specify option. That was chosen. On the other hand, this is the method that also has to make a choice between catch or specify. So this will be the catch option was chosen. And as soon as the catch option was chosen for this method here, that means the exception has now been handled in this place for good. And the exception will not be propagated further anymore. So for the caller of this particular method, since the exception has been handled, they don't have to opt for either of the choices for either catch or specify. Okay, that's just to use this example to show to you. But these two options over here, either to catch over here or to specify, so this actually so-called the catch or specify requirements, which I need to go over quickly with you. It's a principle. Okay, the catch or specify requirements. So the code that might throw certain exception must be enclosed by one of the two ways, meaning that the code that's actually making a call, meaning that we are in the caller context. If we are in the caller of a method, that method might throw an exception, the caller must make a decision between the two, either to catch or to specify. Okay, let's now look at the two. Okay, and let me just show you the slides, show you the illustration over here, right? So I got both options over here. We got a catch solution or we got a specify solution. You choose only one, but not both, just one. But you got to choose one. You got to choose exactly one solution. Let's see what the catch solution is about. The catch solution meaning that we're going to handle the exception at this level for the caller. So a try statement that catches and handles the exception. So you'll see the try and catch block. So these are the new keywords you have to learn for this purpose, try and also catch over here. Okay, and then we also let's take a look. So the assumption is the callee over here. So this is something we will see later when I revisit the circle and bank example. But for now, I'll just say this callee throws an exception, specifically the invalid radius exception, and upon an invalid input value, which is -10 over here, right? We know that it's actually invalid. And upon throwing this exception over here, so the current caller, which is the main method, is facing a choice to either to catch or specify. And now we choose the catch option, which is to enclose the method call that might throw the exception. Well, actually in this case, because it's -10, so we know that it will throw the exception. So we're going to enclose this method here within the try and catch block. And then, so the syntax is for the try, it will be curly brackets over here to have lines of code. And also for the catch, you got to say parentheses and give some exception type. In this case, we simply say negative radius exception. Okay, and then the some parameter name. It's almost like when you're declaring a method. Okay, I'll speak about the syntax a little bit more later. And also the catch block is to say once you have caught the exception, you can do some actions to really do some maybe either to do some repair or maybe to just print out maybe to inform the user about such error. Okay, either way. So that's the catch option. Okay, or if you don't like the catch option, meaning that you want to propagate the exception to further your caller further in the call stack, right? Like in this case over here. Let's say this method here, it choose once it got propagated this particular exception from this method here, it chose not to really handle that. It chose not to catch it. It will simply specify the exception and then propagate that further to its caller. So that's the case we are talking about. Let's take a look. So what's really the specified solution? A method that specifies as part of its header that it may or may not throw the exception. And the exception, if thrown, will be thrown to the method's caller for handling, right? So for example, here we're saying that we're gonna once we got this exception here propagated, we're gonna propagate it further to our caller. So that's what's happening. Okay, let's see the syntax for that. So another keyword you have to learn, and notice the subtle difference over here. So you're gonna say throws over here. Okay, and notice the extra s over here. Versus, okay, we'll see the throw keyword in other example. So what's happening here, you can see the void, withdraw, double amount, and also throws. So these are parts of the header, the orange one. So these are the header of the method. What we learned before is about the return type, which is void, is a mutator, and also the name of the method, parameter name list, and now we're adding something new before you actually got the curly brackets, right? So that's why I say it's part of the header. So we are saying that we specify that this method might throw this particular exception, which might come from this line of code over here, right? So that's the callee that we assume may or may not actually throw that corresponding exception, okay? So this is the callee that may throw an exception, invalid transaction exception, something like that. Exception upon an invalid amount. For example, if the amount over here is minus 500, in that case, it will be invalid. In which case, we can I will show you how this withdraw method will actually somehow propagates the invalid transaction exception, and then we might say for this withdrawal method here, we may choose to propagate it further by including the throws invalid transaction exception in its header. So these are the two options you want to have in your mind, and then we'll see exactly how we can, for the same caller, we can choose either of the options. Again, you choose only one option, but not both. Okay, either the try and catch block, or as part of the header, you will say throws. Right? You should know both. Let me talk about one more important point here. We just spoke about the catch or specify requirements. You should review it. And now let me talk about the flow of execution. That's really important, right? So what really makes the exceptions mechanism stand out compared with the console messages is the normal flow of execution will be disrupted if an exception occurs. Let's see exactly. Okay. Let's say we talk about two different cases. Either when the flow is normal or when the flow is actually abnormal, meaning that some exception may have occurred. Okay, and let's make the assumption that the exception that might occur is something called some exception. Right? Think about the naming convention for exceptions are simply like classes, right? And that's some exception which may or may not be thrown. Okay, let's talk about case number one. Case number one, let's say O.M over here, that's the method called that may or may not throw some exception, right? So let's say in this case, the normal flow, let's say no exception was thrown. Let's say for the input values are all valid. In that case, we have no exception thrown from O.M. So in this case, what would be the execution flow? the execution flow will be as follows. That means we're going to execute O.M for sure. After that, we're going to execute the rest of the try block, right? You might have some lines before this. You might also have some lines after this until the closing curly brackets over here. So everything will be executed. After this, everything that's in the catch block will be bypassed, right? So this part will not be executed, right? So that's about the normal flow. What about the case where the exception was actually thrown? Let's talk about that case. That's also worth our attention. Let's say we talk about this particular method call here, and let's say we are talking about a case where the exception is thrown because some error actually occurred. Maybe the input value was invalid, maybe negative number that was not allowed. Exception was thrown. In that case, what will be the execution flow? It goes like this. Of course, we still have to execute this method here, right? But it will be disrupted as soon as the exception is thrown. In that case, we're going to bypass the rest of the catch block. The rest of the try block. So this part here is simply bypassed, as opposed to in the normal case, the catch block will be bypassed, right? And then after this, what's going to be executed is this some exception that we assume is going to be thrown will be caught. And then all the lines of code inside this particular catch block will be executed as well, right? And then in both cases, outside the try and catch block, all the lines will still be executed in both cases, okay? Just to mention here. You can think about the try and catch block is really a special block of code that stands alone by itself. So you have to know exactly what should be the execution flow within the try and catch block. Either with the disruption, in this case, it will be with the disruption, so that means the rest of the try block is simply omitted, bypassed, and then we just execute the catch block. Or we simply don't have any exception thrown. In that case, we'll simply finish off the try block and then completely ignore the catch block, and then go on to the rest of the code outside the try and catch block. All right, so that's about the two cases you want to know as well intuitively. All right, so enough about the theory of what an exception is and also what you should do as a caller, either to catch or specify, and also about the execution flow, either normal or abnormal, depending on whether the exception actually occurs. All right, in the next video, we'll give you some simple examples to explore different possibility to illustrate the catch or specify requirements.